Back then, I was in my early 20s and had a relatively small group of friends. It was mainly just me, Andrew, and David. Most of the time we spent together was just walking around in the nearby forest and talking, or going off and exploring random things. But one night Andrew came over to my place and told me about this creepy abandoned building one of his friends had told him about. He said it was off a trail in a woody area not too far from here. Of course, I asked him what the place was, to which Andrew replied that he didn't know, and his friend didn't even go near it. This actually got me pretty excited, and we both called up David to tell him about it as well, and he seemed pretty pumped about it too. It was already 5 o'clock, but the sun didn't set until 7, and the darkness would only make it more exciting anyways. So Andrew and I packed up some basic stuff, like flashlights and some snacks. Then we headed over to David's apartment and picked him up. I parked the car next to a local grocery store that was just a couple minutes walk from the edge of the woods. Supposedly, there was a half-mile trail that led to a small lookout, but if you continue past the end of the path for a few minutes, you'll find the abandoned building. Knowing this, we found the trailhead and continued down, passing several other people as they were heading back. Honestly, I started to lose the excitement a bit because I began feeling like this was just a prank. The trail seemed pretty populated, so how could we have not known about this place before? Anyway, we continued and eventually made it to the lookout. The sun was still partially up at this point, but the woods began to darken gradually every minute. We took a quick break at the lookout to get the flashlights out, then we continued past the area and into the trees. It wasn't until maybe 15 minutes in that we all started to get annoyed. We'd been navigating between thick trees and bushes in the partial darkness for a while now, and hadn't seen a single thing. "You sure this isn't just some stupid joke, Andrew?" David passive-aggressively asked. "No, this guy was serious, trust me," he responded, trying to assure us the best he could. Just a second later, we heard a bush nearby rustling around, and immediately we all flicked our flashlights towards the sound. It made me jump a bit, seeing the bush moving around as if an animal had jumped out of it or something. But right behind it in the distance, we could make out an old structure. That rush of excitement filled my body again, and we all made our way towards it. The building was very strange though, in the way that it just didn't seem like it belonged alone in a forest. It looked like a small work building, maybe used to be a woodworking station or something, I don't know. The old wooden front door was laying on the ground right in front of the structure though, as we all made our way inside. Immediately upon entering, the most awful and disgusting smell hit us. We glanced at each other, all clearly nervous, but even more curious. The first floor consisted of 3 rooms. The first was an open room with a large wooden table or workbench. There was a ton of trash lying around and really rusty tools that had been left behind. I followed David into the hallway that led to the other 2 rooms, both with closed doors. The smell was even more potent the closer we got to the door, so much so that Andrew backed away and put his shirt over his nose. "Guys, we should just leave. That smell is unbearable," Andrew muttered to us as he moved his flashlight around. We both ignored him, though I did start getting a really bad feeling. I shined my flashlight over to the other door and took a few steps towards it, while David opened the other and stepped inside the room. Almost instantly, David screamed and quickly backed out of the room, making both me and Andrew jump. This was followed by multiple loud thuds echoing through the building from behind the 3rd room's closed door. We sprinted out frantically, not stopping until we were completely out of breath. "What the fuck just happened?" Andrew said in between his breaths. "Guys, there was a body on the ground in that room. I swear to God, there was a body there." David was freaking out, looking all around. I could see in his eyes that he was seriously traumatized by what he'd just seen. I mentioned that we needed to keep moving, and that I thought there was someone else in that 3rd room hiding. We were able to make it out relatively quickly, basically just running in the direction that we knew led to the road. When we got back to the car, I drove us all down to the police station a couple blocks away, where we explained the encounter. The officer that took our account honestly looked ashamed of us, as if we were stupid for having even gone there. I mean, sure, it may have been a dumb idea, but we also had just explained that we may have encountered a murder scene, and this cop was just giving us an annoyed attitude. Anyway, they sent a couple officers down. We actually stayed in our car outside the police station, waiting to get an update for over 2 hours, until finally I got a call, and we all went back inside to talk to a group of cops. They found spots of blood, as well as signs of someone having been there recently, but no body. They did seem to take the situation more seriously now, though, and questioned all of us more thoroughly. Fast forward a couple weeks later, they found what was likely the body that David had seen, poorly buried several hundred feet away from the abandoned building. I believe they determined that the person had been dead before being brought to the building, so I guess it was just where they hid the body before dumping it. As far as I'm aware, the case didn't end up going very far, and I don't know if they ever even found any real suspects. It was a crazy experience though, and the fact that we were all so close to a possible murderer is still unnerving for me to think about today. I live in Detroit, Michigan. If you aren't already aware, Detroit has some of the largest amounts of abandoned buildings in the United States. I'm not sure why it is exactly, but I've always grown up living in towns that were neighboring these old worn down buildings, so I was used to it. A lot of people would hang out in them or explore them for fun. It was just a regular thing. When I was in middle school, I had a best friend who I'll call Philip. During our middle school years, both of us began to find interest in these abandoned buildings, thinking about what had happened before they were abandoned and what could still be inside of them. Obviously, we knew it was somewhat dangerous to go exploring them, but having just become teenagers, we felt like badasses for some reason, and so we kind of forced ourselves not to be scared of them. We knew gangs would sometimes hang out in the abandoned neighborhoods with all the buildings next to each other, so we did at least avoid those places. But there were a lot of other buildings nearby that were mostly isolated in the forested areas, so we began exploring those over the next few months. We had gone to maybe 3 or 4, and would make each one our designated hangout spot for a few weeks before finding a new place. And that's when things got bad. Philip and I were traveling down an overgrown and cracked cement road that led to several abandoned homes that we'd already been to. We continued further down this time, however, in search of a new and interesting place. Most of the homes were just a short minute's walk between each other, but as we got further along the path, we noticed that we'd been walking for almost 5 minutes and hadn't seen another house. With this in mind, we continued, unsure of what to expect. The thing was, there was still a concrete path, so it had to lead to something. Eventually, maybe another 5 minutes later, we reached the end of the concrete portion of the path. However, there was a faint gravel trail that continued. As far as we could see, it was just trees, but we were sure it had to lead somewhere, so we kept going forward. Only 1 or 2 minutes later, we finally reached a house. It was odd looking, kind of like a townhouse, but a random townhouse this far out wouldn't make much sense. All of the windows were boarded up, and the front door was closed, but the garage was cracked open, leaving a few feet of space at the bottom for us to crawl under. Philip banged on the metal garage door a few times to make sure it was gonna hold, then we both knelt under it. Inside the garage was pretty much nothing, a bit of garbage and dirt, but the door leading into the house was closed. I pressed up against it, turning the knob and pushing hard, but it wouldn't budge. "Hey, can you give me a hand with this?" Both of us pushed, and we were able to get it open, enough for us to squeeze through. First thing we noticed was a huge dresser that was pressed up against the door. I gave Philip a confused look, then we both climbed over it and made our way into the kitchen. From where we were standing, we could see down a hallway that led to some stairs going up, as well as what looked like the living room. Oddly though, the place wasn't in very bad shape. Not much trash inside, and relatively clean. We could tell people had been there before though, as there were a bunch of footprints on the dusty wooden floors. As we started walking through the hallway, a sudden, soft bang came from the other side of the house. It sounded as if something small had dropped on the floor. We exchanged glances and stood quietly in the hallway, listening for anything else. I don't know about Philip, but I was definitely getting pretty worried. The front door was just ahead of us though, so after a few seconds of silence, I slowly started toward it. A little over halfway there, an ear-piercing, loud metal scraping sound vibrated through the house, followed by an enormous crashing bang from the garage. I swung the front door open and we sprinted out of there. My heart was beating out of my chest and I could feel my adrenaline rushing through me. As we got back on the path, I looked back, seeing the garage was fully closed now. We pretty much ran all the way to Philip's house. Neither of us were sure what happened. Philip thought it was just a coincidence that the garage happened to have fallen while we were there, but I wasn't so sure. I believe someone may have set the place up as a trap, waiting for people to go in through the garage and then closing them in. Why else would the door have been blocked by a dresser, while the non-functional garage was dangling open? I don't know if they thought we were still in there, and that's why they closed it, or maybe it was just to scare us, having already known we escaped. We never went back to find out, though, and we since decided to only explore the places that were nearby, and not deep in forests. My best friend Jack and I always had our little places where we would hide from the rest of the world, whether it was a corner in the schoolyard or the skate park nearby. When we were tired of the grown-ups around us or our siblings, we just took our comics and left for a while. After a few years, we built a treehouse in Jack's backyard and spent a lot of time in there. But whenever his younger brother came up to join us, and we were unable to kick him out because of their mother being around, we often left for the woods instead. With our books and flashlights, we stayed out all day, and over time, the treehouse became more often occupied by Jack's brother and his friends. His mother said we were getting too old for it anyways, which we full-heartedly disagreed on. Still, we were forced to find a new hideout. So, one day we grabbed our stuff and went into the woods again, going farther than we'd ever been before. We tried to build a new shelter, but it didn't even get near to the greatness of the treehouse, and we got home disappointed. My mother sent us into the woods again the next day to walk our dog, Sammy, and we went even farther than before, determined to give the search a second try. Sammy, however, wasn't very keen on sniffing out the best possible places, and he never even waited for us while we judged a certain spot on its potential. One time even, when he dashed off again, he didn't come back. Jack was the one who noticed, and after 30 minutes of calling, searching, and whistling, I called my mom in a panic. She quickly dispelled my worries and assured me that I would probably find him soon. It wasn't the first time he'd done that, and every time he'd come running back. So Jack and I walked on, even when twilight began to fall. We put on our flashlights, and Jack suddenly signaled for me to stop. He said he heard barking, and standing in silence, I heard it too. We hastened to where it came from, and found Sammy in front of a small stone building, barking at seemingly nothing.
"What you got there, bud? We've been looking all over for you."
I got the leash, and Sammy began growling at something. I connected the leash back to Sammy's collar, and we both started heading out. We took one last look at the building though, agreeing that Sammy had helped us find a hideout after all, and we came back the next day. It was already twilight by then, having finished our schoolwork and dinner first. We left Sammy home and only took our flashlights, phones, and batteries with us, ready for the dark. The stone building turned out to be an almost square, singular structure with a creaking metal door, as well as a corrugated iron roof and no windows. There was nothing inside, and the floor was made of the same cold stone. We took the next day to bring over some old blankets and cushions, and even a lamp that worked on batteries. The treehouse was all forgotten, and we spent the last semi-summer days with the metal door open while we sat reading in the little building. We closed it when fall came along. It didn't really bother us. It was dark outside now too, so it didn't really matter. Our interior had gotten some updates as well. We hung a garland with little lights above our heads and put posters on the walls. This hideout, so we thought, was going to last forever. We went there every day by default, even when it rained. Especially when it rained, actually. The sound of the drops on the iron roof had to be the best thing to exist, ticking calmly in the background while we both listened to our own music with headphones on. One day, we were listening to the same music on my phone, lying lazily on the cushions with our schoolwork untouched in the corner. It rained pretty heavily, the winds howling around the building. After a while, my phone died and we had no more music to listen to. Jack hummed a little instead, prepared to do anything to avoid his homework. He flinched when the door creaked suddenly and his humming stopped. We stared at the entrance before looking at each other. I shrugged it off, and as I reached for my notebook, footsteps were heard around the back of the building. I remember both of us being pretty shaken. I was just hoping it was someone harmlessly exploring the woods or something, but it was pouring outside and we were fairly deep in the forest.
"Jack, I think we should leave."
But before he could answer, we heard running footsteps going around the building, followed by the door slamming open. Wind and rain violently blew into the room. Jack screamed, and I was just as shaken as he was. Both unable to move, we watched into the darkness of the woods until we realized that no one was there, at least not anymore. Eventually, I found the strength to stand up and close the door. We agreed to leave soon after, and when we came home soaking wet, we decided not to visit the hideout during the dark again because we didn't know who had opened the door, and we didn't want to stay another night to find out. As a matter of fact, we still don't. Me and my best friend, who I'll call Matt, lived in Pennsylvania. We are technically neighbors, though he lives almost a mile down the road. Both of our homes have a lot of land, mainly filled with empty forest areas that lead up to the hills. Anyway, Matt was hanging over at my place one night when he mentioned that he'd found something interesting while he was out in the forest behind his house. He said it was a tunnel with old wooden beams holding it together. Matt said he didn't want to explore it alone, as it gave him a bad feeling. I asked how far it was, and he said it was maybe a mile's walk behind his house, with no path or anything leading to it. Honestly, it sounded interesting to me, so I agreed to check it out with him. I grabbed my small backpack from my closet and packed a flashlight and a water bottle. Then we drove my car over to his house and started the walk. It was only 5 p.m., so we had a good 2 hours of sunlight left, which we both figured would be fine. We walked for 20 minutes before we made it. The structure was exactly as he'd described, a simple tunnel with wooden pillars holding up the entrance. There was nothing else outside of it or anything lying around. Matt took the flashlight out of my bag and shined it inside the tunnel as we approached the entrance. It seemed to go straight for a while, with more beams on the sides. I thought it was an abandoned mine, but it was so bare and empty that it made me unsure. I've seen old mines before, but they usually have stuff lying around, old wooden crates, or even short rails leading to them. Matt led the way in, and I followed behind. It was cold and creepy. Every step we took echoed down the tunnel. After a minute's walk, we reached the end of the entrance tunnel, finding another path going to the left. On the wall was some writing as well. It was an arrow pointing back to where we came, and had the word exit written below it. We continued on, but only a few steps down, we noticed a lot of garbage piled around the sides. Trash bags, food wrappers, and water bottles mostly. We already knew someone had been here before, having seen the writing, but the trash didn't look dirty. Matt held the light close to a chip bag on the ground, and it was clean. Barely even a speck of dust on it. With dust basically falling from the ceiling, this creeped us out. Someone had to have been here within the last few hours, unless there was some weird phenomenon going on with all the trash. I think Matt saw the worry on my face, because he said it was likely some teens hanging out here earlier. He started walking again, passing the trash. As Matt's footsteps departed, I got an odd feeling and I looked back where we came from, making sure no one was watching us. But then I heard Matt's footsteps stop abruptly. I turned and saw him down the tunnel, facing what looked like another hallway, but he was standing still.
Matt?
My voice echoed through the tunnel, but he didn't respond. The way he was standing, so still and clearly looking at something like he was in shock.
I'm sorry,
he whispered, backing away and quickly walking towards me while pointing ahead for me to go back. As we turned into the main tunnel, a loud bang echoed towards us. We sprinted until we finally made it out, then jogged the rest of the way to Matt's house while watching behind us to make sure nobody was following. When we got inside, I looked over at Matt and he looked horrified.
What happened? Was someone in there?
I asked, still not knowing what he'd seen. He looked at me, then looked back down. He said there was an unclothed man sitting just a few feet down the next tunnel. Apparently he was holding what looked like a squirrel or a rabbit, in a way that Matt said looked like he was trying to gut it and eat it. Hearing this, I almost wanted to crack a joke, or say that I knew he was just messing with me, but there was something about the way he told me that I knew he wasn't lying. I don't know, that would be a pretty disturbing thing to see in a place like that. We never went back, and a few days later Matt seemed to be back to normal. Obviously I never saw the man, so it could all be some weird made-up story, but if you saw the way Matt was after we got out of that tunnel, you'd believe him too. With people living in the wilderness like that though, there's no telling what they'll do if they see you, especially if you happen to have wandered into their home like we did. I had recently moved into a new house outside the city I lived in. I wanted to be away from the chaotic lifestyle of living in a city and be in a more calm, quiet area. The house I got was a rental property owned by a nice man. Everything about it was perfect. The inside was a good size and modern, and the outside had a lot of land, filled with trees, blocking the views of roads and neighbors' houses. It made it easy to feel like I was alone in the middle of nowhere, which was actually a good feeling for me. I'd been there for almost a week, though I almost never had the chance to go outside due to working all day. But on Friday afternoon, I got home from work early, so I decided to walk around the trees on the side of the house. It was nice and peaceful, but was just a regular forest, I guess. After being out there for a couple minutes though, I spotted something in the distance, far behind the trees. It looked like some sort of structure, but the trees were blocking the view, so I couldn't tell exactly what it was, though I was able to tell that it definitely wasn't a house, at least not one that someone lived in recently. I wasn't really in the exploring mood, and it was getting late, so I left it and went inside for the night. A few hours later though, I found myself thinking about it again, and ended up contacting the landlord and asking about it. I was just curious and felt that it would be of no harm to ask. I forgot about the text after a while though, and went on with my night until I went to bed around 9. I went to work the next morning and got back at 4, which was when I noticed I still hadn't gotten a response from the landlord. I thought maybe he didn't know what I was talking about, which then made me doubt myself. I really didn't get a good look at it, so maybe I'd mistaken it for something that it wasn't. I went back outside and walked further into the forest towards where I had seen it. Once I spotted it again, I got closer. I knew now that it was definitely real, which made it odd if the landlord didn't know it was here, considering he told me that he had lived on the property for 4 years. Standing right next to it though, I was able to tell that it was actually a very old, abandoned home. It was small, but seemed to have 2 stories. I walked around it, just kind of inspecting it. I really didn't like that it was in my backyard, and that nobody told me about it. I knew it probably didn't make any difference to anything, but the thing was creepy as hell. Around the back was an old door that was half open, and barely hanging on the hinges. I didn't want to go inside this place, but I knew I couldn't bear the thought of knowing that this abandoned home was in my yard while having no idea what's inside it. After seeing everything that I could from the outside, I walked up the broken back porch and knocked on the walls, making sure nothing was inside. Then I slowly pushed the door open and stepped in. The first thing that hit me was the smell. It was disgusting, probably the worst thing I'd ever smelled. I went further in, expecting to see a dead animal somewhere, but it was mostly empty, aside from an old table in the middle of the room. It was dark, as there were only 2 windows, both having boards covering them. There was another room on the bottom floor that was also empty, but had a staircase going up. The problem, though, was that it was pitch black at the top of the stairs. Thinking about it then, I hadn't seen any windows on the top floor from the outside. Going up there was a little too much for me, but I at least wanted to see that it looked normal, so I grabbed my phone out and shined the light up the stairs. But there was nothing. I mean, no upstairs. It was just a wooden wall at the top of the steps. I was in a weird state of confusion and shock, just looking at the strange structure. But then, I heard something. Someone else was breathing, very softly, behind the wall at the top of the steps. I backed away slowly, hoping I hadn't been noticed already. But after I started moving, I heard footsteps upstairs walking across the floor. It sounded like they too were trying to be quiet though. I got maybe halfway before I couldn't handle the intensity of the situation, and I just sprinted out of the house and back to mine. I locked all of my doors and stood by the window, checking for anyone following me. I really wasn't sure what to do. I didn't even know if that house was actually on my property or not. Plus, it really wasn't even my property anyways, because I was renting. The landlord still hadn't responded though, which just made me feel worse about the whole thing. Unfortunately, due to my overthinking, I didn't finally get myself to call the police until an hour later. They were unsure about the place as well, as far as what it was or who it belonged to, but when they searched it, it was empty. I asked them about the wall at the top of the stairs, but I was even more terrified to hear that they didn't know what I was talking about. They said they walked upstairs and there was just another empty room, no wall blocking it or anything. I only grew more concerned and worried, but I was getting the feeling that they didn't take the case very seriously, nor did they care about my concerns, so I just let them leave. The worst, and maybe even the most strange part of all, was in the weeks following. My landlord continued to not respond, even to my normal questions about payments. After it had been over a month of no responses, I sent him one last message saying I was breaking the lease and would be moving out. I left, never getting any more texts or emails from them, despite ending my signed lease 11 months early. While nothing actually happened, I still consider my experience at that house to be one of the most horrifying and unusual experiences of my life.